Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
Hey there, how are you? This week we're going to talk to Salt Lake Police Chief Mike Brown about keeping a growing and changing community safe.
With the passing of this last legislation, I think it's a good start, but I would like to see it go one step further. Because, in Salt Lake City, in Utah, there's about 32,000 individuals that are of DACA status. Not a huge number, but when you start looking at it as people, as mothers, fathers, as you look at young explorers that want to serve their in a police department, that really puts a face to the problem.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani, and this is Only in America. For local law enforcement, building trust in their communities is key to doing their jobs. But for many immigrant communities, contact with law enforcement is associated with discrimination, surveillance, and often a risk of deportation. So the question is, how can local police build a better relationship with their communities? Well, for one, recruiting a diverse roster of law enforcement who look like and belong to the communities they serve. In Utah, the state's changing demographics and growing immigrant population has led to a need for police departments to understand the needs of its community. And the leadership is being shown both at the local level and at the state level in Utah. In fact, recently, the governor of Utah signed new legislation that would allow legal permanent residents to become local law enforcement officers. Local leaders like our guest today are working not just to support solutions like this particular state law, but to implement innovative tactics at the local level to keep the community safe, but also to advocate for dreamers and others within the immigrant community. Our guest today is Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown. He served in the department since 1991 and became chief in 2016. We talked about what his department is doing to build a pathway for a diverse range of young people, including DACA recipients, to get involved in law enforcement, and the statewide policies Utah is putting forward that would make it easier for them to serve. Chief, thank you very, very much for joining. Over the years, we have really enjoyed working with you and your team. So I actually wanted to start the conversation with a little bit about yourself. What got you to Salt Lake? What got you to join and then lead the police department?
Well, that's a long story. I'll tell you, I'm from Salt Lake City. I grew up in the southern part of this county. I'm second generation law enforcement. My father was a Salt Lake County deputy. So I grew up in that family and that culture. I really never thought I would follow my father. I was going to the University of Utah. I was going to be a doctor until I had completed most of my prerequisites until I hit organic chemistry. And it is not my thing. And so I remember the day I came home and I told my mother, I said, Mom, I am not going on to med school. And she cried and she was upset. And so I'm going to go into law enforcement. And so I did. And I started here with the Salt Lake City Police Department in 1991. I've served many different assignments here. I've worked my way up through the ranks. In 2015, I became the interim chief. 2016, I became the chief, and I've been the chief now going on 6 years. So the day I was sworn in, my mother finally said, okay, I forgive you for not going to med school. So
that's a very demanding mother. So tell me a little bit about how Salt Lake has changed over time as you've grown up and as you've been a member of the force.
Well, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Our force has grown in size. Since I've become the chief, I think we've grown in size at least 50 officers. About a year and a half ago, we merged with the Salt Lake City Airport PD, so they became one police department with us. But we've also seen our community grow. It's very diverse. And looking at numbers, I think our population identifies at about 77% white. The number I think is 16% Hispanic, 1.5, I'm going by memory, African American, and about 2% Asian. So we have diversity, and we've tried very hard as a police department to make our police department look like the communities we serve. And so I think over the last few years, that's been one of the biggest things we've done, is try to involve our community in our police department and have our police department look like the communities we serve.
Because I remember actually the last time I was in Salt Lake, and I think we went to breakfast, and then you told me about a program back then where members of the refugee community were being recruited to work in the department. And I just remember leaving that conversation, really appreciative of the steps that you all were taking, even a number of years ago.
Yeah, we have for probably the last 7-8 years had a very strong Explorer program, and that's what we're talking about. And let me give you a little definition of who these young adults are. These are individuals within our community. They have to be 14 years of age to join. They have to complete the 8th grade. We do a background check. They have to have a GPA of 2.0 or better. They have to attend 80% of the meetings, and we have 4-hour meetings every Tuesday.
Wow.
That's a big commitment. And they have to meet our grooming standards. So to give you an idea of what type of commitment that means, our explorers, and we'll go through some numbers here in a little bit, but I'm going back to 2019 because 2020 I like to throw away. That's an anomaly and we can't really compare it to anything, but we had meeting hours, and this is based off of 50 explorers. Our explorers put in 5,606 hours coming to meetings. They went and they do different events with us. They do parades, they do marathons, they do different races, 5Ks. They help us with the conference traffic, the LDS conference traffic. They do our bike rodeos, and something that's really interesting, they are the guardians of our fallen memorial up at the Capitol. So the fallen memorial that honors the officers that have lost their life in the line of duty. They go up and sweep and clean and polish the brass and keep that looking good year round. So in hours total, that Explorer Pack or that group dedicated 8,984 hours to service in our community. That's about 169.5 hours per Explorer. Now I'm looking at myself kind of retrospectively. I was an Eagle Scout. I did a lot of community service, but I'm telling you, I didn't do almost 5 or 6 weeks of service in the community. So when I look at these young individuals, I really have to take my hat off and tip my hand to them and say, well done. These are individuals that want to be with us, and they may be looking at a future in law enforcement. So it's a great recruiting tool. I think one thing is that it is the most diverse by ethnicity, race, and gender. It's the most diverse unit in the department. I'll take a breath there and let you maybe ask some questions.
So of the explorers, have you started to see over time increased participation from immigrant families?
We have, but Ali, we don't ask. We don't ask.
Yeah.
If they're a member of our community and they want to come in and serve with us, we don't ask. We know there are some of these young adults that are either LPR or DACA, but we don't ask. So just to give you a breakdown, this is the stats from 2021. We have 18 male explorers. We have 18 female explorers. 18 are Hispanic, 1 Asian, 3 African American, 13 Caucasian, 1 Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and 3 are multiracial. So, I mean, when you really look at it, there's not another unit, squad, division, bureau that matches the diversity of this department.
That's great. That's amazing. When did you see and realize that this was a problem to bring folks who are immigrants but not naturalized U.S. citizens?
Let me give you an example. We had one individual. He joined our ranks. He joined our Explorer program at the age of 15. He rose through the ranks. He came to all the meetings. He met the grade in school. He was exceptional. You could tell he was a natural born leader. He rose from just an explorer. He became a sergeant, and then he promoted to lieutenant, and then he promoted to captain. He was actually leading this group of 50 to 60 explorers. And in talking to our officers that are over the Explorer program, they have told me without any doubt that he was probably the best explorer we've ever had. But as he started getting towards the age out of 21, And so a lot of times they'll start to make application or try to get into our department. He came to some of the officers and said, "Hey, I don't have status. I don't have. I'm not legally here." And so he was working with an attorney, and they made some different suggestions. So we tried to help him as well. But it was really sad because this young man who was leading this group, and let me tell you the type of guy this was. When we did the PT tests, he did 110 push-ups in 1 minute. This guy was an animal. He ran the 1.5 miles like the wind. I mean, this is the guy you want to be a cop. But he did not have status. And he came to us kind of very brokenheartedly and said, you know what they want me to do? They want me to go back to Mexico for a couple years and then reapply to come back in. And he said, I've been here since I was 5. I says, I don't have any family in Mexico. I don't know anybody in Mexico. All my family's here. And so that just wasn't an option. And it was really heartbreaking to see that as he reached 21, a young man that had dedicated all those years, all that time, just wanting to be in law enforcement, sadly, just because where he was born, was told no. Talk about slamming the door on somebody's dreams.
And where is he now? Do you keep in touch with him?
Yeah, I think his team does. I think he may be going up to the U, continuing his education. He'll probably go on to be an engineer or a lawyer or something like that.
Or a doctor.
A doctor. He'll probably do much better organic chemistry. But to talk about, look, I mean, again, this is just one of several of these cadets that have come through our Explore program that have wanted to be in law enforcement, and to have to tell them after they've worked so hard, I'm sorry, you can't be. Just breaks your heart.
So what was how did the legislation come together in the State House in terms of, being able to expand the eligibility criteria for officers?
Well, Al, you remember, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, I'm trying to think where we were in one of the conferences, we were talking about this very thing.
Right.
And I was working with Commissioner Squires at the time, the Commissioner over Public Safety. And we were talking about maybe looking at ways that we could remove those restrictions so that somebody could serve in law enforcement. I mean, it's very ironic that you can serve in the military, you can die for your country, but you can't be in law enforcement. And so that conversation has kind of resonated over the last 2 or 3 years. And there was a senator here, Senator Maine, that was going to run some legislation to remove some of those barriers. And I remember talking with her because I think many times people are confused between LPR status and DACA status. It's very different. And I was talking to the senator and her team because they were talking about a young man from another city that would love to be in law enforcement, just like the young man I was talking about. And the question came up, well, are we talking about LPR status? Or are we talking about DACA? And come to find out, it was a DACA individual. And although the legislation helped the LPR folks, it's one step away from helping those that are kind of trapped in that DACA world. So that conversation, I know I talked with you and your team. I think you gave us some good legal direction and advice. And I think with the passing of this last legislation, I think it's a good start, but I would like to see it go one step further. Because I mean, in Salt Lake City, in Utah, there's about 32,000 individuals that are of DACA status. Not a huge number. And sometimes people just look at that as a number, but when you start looking at it as people, as mothers, fathers, as you look at young explorers that want to serve their in a police department, that really puts a face to the problem.
So for the audience to understand what the barriers were before the legislation, because I think that I don't think people realize that, at least before this legislation in Utah, you had to be a United States citizen to serve in law enforcement. So this legislation addressed that.
Right. That, and then they wanted the ability to go back and look at somebody in a 5-year window for a background check, which wouldn't be a problem for most anybody that's in our Explore program. But those two things is what this legislation addressed.
And what was it like in the conversations that you or the senator were having with other lawmakers, so that they understood what the problem was and how it could be fixed. And you didn't get sucked into this, pretty awful immigration debate about, is a person, citizen, not a citizen, should they be able to, serve in law enforcement? How did those conversations go?
The session this time was virtual, which was kind of different, but when it goes kind of back to what we were just talking about, when you bring an individual and you show them, you say, look, this young man wants so desperately to be a police officer. This is what he's accomplished in his life. This is the service he's dedicated to this profession. He's proven himself as a leader. And when you show somebody that, those questions about status and DACA, they kind of they fall away, and you go, yeah, that young man deserves a chance. So the conversation is really small when you put a human face to it.
Yeah. I also find that for a lot of Americans, they assume that immigrants are threats. And I think this is just such a powerful example of immigrants who are protecting Americans and American values, as whether it's members of the armed services or Salt Lake Police Department.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, a lot of these young people have been here since they were 2 or 3 years old.
Right.
They know this is their city, this is their police department, this is their country. They don't know anything else. So I think that argument kind of falls mute when you start talking about that.
Yeah. So what do you think that, in Utah, you have 2 very important senators in terms of Senators Romney and Lee. Senator Romney has talked about, the importance of dreamers. Are you optimistic that, there is statewide support for a solution for DACA recipients and dreamers?
I think so. I do. Very good senators, both Lee and Romney, and I think they understand the situation and what we've been, the problem we're talking about here in Salt Lake and in Utah. And I think it's kind of nice to be in a state where we start looking at these problems and embrace the community we live in and those around us. And we lead out on what they're part of our community. Let's see if we can help them out. So with those kind of constituents and those senators hearing that message, I think we're in good hands. I think they understand the need and the want, and I think they're respected. And Ali, this is where we've talked for years. Federal immigration is really the stumbling block. I think states and cities want these restrictions lifted. It's the federal institutions that need to come together and fix this.
And what I find so remarkable about the legislation and the way that the conversation unfolded is that, look, Utah is not California. It's certainly not New York. Utah is at the statewide level is a very conservative state. So I just think it really provides a powerful example to other states, much less to Congress.
Yeah, we are. We're known as a very conservative state, but a very compassionate state, and a state that wants to love our brothers and sisters and see them succeed and fulfill their dreams.
And what's the advice that you would offer to your peers in law enforcement in terms of engaging the immigrant community, whether it's as explorers or advocating for legislative change at a state or at a federal level?
Well, my advice is to embrace. We're all talking about, 2020 was a year where law enforcement suffered. I think some of the acts that we've seen, back in Minneapolis almost a year ago, painted law enforcement with a very broad brush. None of us really condoned that. That wasn't us, but it did start the conversation. And I think there was some fracturing of trust in our communities. But I know my peers and other chiefs are trying desperately to build that trust back, because that's paramount to the work we do. And so I'd say the conversation is just to engage with your community. We're all trying very hard right now to recruit new officers into this profession. When you open the door and put applications out, you'd be surprised how many of the minority population step forward and say, although it's difficult, I want to do this job. So I would say, don't count anybody out. I would say, embrace those that want to serve, and let's see where that takes us.
Chief, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I got to say, we have really enjoyed working with you all and have learned so much and are looking forward to what lies ahead. So thank you.
Valley, thank you. Likewise. Take care.
You too. Chief Mike Brown is the police chief in Salt Lake City. You can learn more about Chief Brown at our website, immigrationforum.org/podcast. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to Only in America wherever you are listening to this episode. Only in America is produced and edited by Katie Lutz, Joanna Taylor, and Becca Wall. Our artwork and graphics are designed by Carla Leha. I'm Ali Nurani. I will talk to you next week.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and strengthening international peace and security. And from Humanity United. When humanity is united, we can bring a powerful force for human dignity.